And you did a lot of work with him, so that was...
Yeah.
What about, were there any that you'd rather forget? Which you'll have to tell us about before you forget.
Well, people know, I think, that my time with Gary Newman wasn't the most, you know... Gary's one of these people that sees music as a means to more aeroplanes and women, I think. But not that there's anything wrong with that, but for me it wasn't quite where I was coming from. And, I mean, to put it in perspective, he did an interview after we'd worked together, and somebody said to him, "Oh, you did an album with Bill Nelson?" And he said, "Yeah, the problem with Bill is he thinks music's got something to do with art." So it wasn't an easy relationship. He'd never had a producer before, which didn't help. The record company wanted him to work with a producer. And his mum and dad managed him and looked after him. So we were in his own studio on the Shepperton Film Studios lot. And his dad sort of had the rose with the gold lady on the front and gold jewellery, and was rather sort of overbearing, and it was just an uncomfortable experience. It was fine getting through the music, but then at the end of the day, he went in 2 days after we'd finished and remixed the thing himself. And the engineer resigned, and I took my name off it. I got paid for it. I bought a Porsche, actually, from it. A second-hand one. It was in the garage opposite the hotel where I was staying in Shepperton, and every day was such an ordeal. I thought, I'm going home in that. I'll blow the entire, fee I'm getting for this. So that sort of compensated. But he's since actually said, I'm giving him his due, he's since said that he now realises what I was trying to do. But at the time he didn't understand where it was coming from. And the plot was that a lot of younger bands had been influenced by Gary, were actually taking it a step further, and the record company felt he should stay ahead of the pack.
Right.
But he was kind of very conservative about staying within certain... I think he felt safe within certain limits,
Yeah.
So, yeah. But it was, what he does is very, very good. As long as you understand what it is he does,
Right.
yeah. But Chris Spedding, I noticed that you mentioned, and I worked with Chris in a strange context, because there was a band I loved in the 70s called Sharks, and I saw them supporting Roxy Music at Sheffield Town Hall.
Right.
And Chris was the lead guitarist, and the drummer, and the bass player, I think the drummer maybe as well, was from Free. Andy Fraser was on bass. And the singer was a guy called Snips, just Snips, who was from Hull, but he was a fantastic singer, real R&B style singer, but white. And Snips did a solo album that Chris Spedding was producing. And Snips rang me up and said, "Will you come and play on my album?" And I thought he wanted me to play guitar, but he wanted me to play keyboards. And, I'm not a great keyboard player even now, but then it was 2 fingers at a time. So I'm going in to do this session, and Chris Spedding's there, and the pair of them, they liked to drink at that time. I think they've maybe sobered up a bit since. But there were crates of beer and sort of bottles of whiskey everywhere. Yeah. And they were slightly worse for wear. And Chris is kind of, okay, I want a G major 7th with an augmented something over there. And I'm going, can you just play me the track and see what I can figure out? And I fumbled through, and I managed to do the keyboard parts on it. But all I remember about Chris is he was kind of a hero of mine, but he was sort of incoherent through most of the thing, but did a very good job on the production. The album turned out really well. Yeah.
Well, I thought it was odd that when I was speaking with him, that he said he'd worked with you, but the two of you, quite well-known guitar players, and you played keyboards and he produced, nobody played guitar in any of the work there.
Yeah, it's strange.
And he's just off touring with Brian Ferry now, and Roxy Music.
Right, yeah.
That, so.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
The Gary Newman thing kind of brings me into another line of questioning. I want to know what your thoughts are on the record industry as it is today.
Well, I guess it's kind of the same as it's always been, but with a little bit more stealth, I think that there's been times when, particularly when the indie labels came up in the early 80s, late 70s, from the punk era, there was this hope that independent labels would liberate the musician from the clutches of the record industry. But what happened, my experience is a lot of the indie labels ended up being just as kind of manipulative and corrupt as the majors. I've had equal problems with independents as I've had with major companies. To think that it's not a business is naive. It is a business. They're in for making money, and immediately you don't make money, you'll be out the door.
Right.
And the fact that there are so many young people around now with guitars and wanting to be pop stars, it's cannon fodder time, you know. They just load them in the front, shoot them out the gun. If they don't hit and stick on the wall and slide down, then sweep them out the door and load the cannon again. And it's kind of brutal in a way, but it's, in a sense, it's always been that way. The time when I signed to EMI with Bebop was a good time. Perhaps the best it's been for people doing my kind of music, because the A&R people, the people who signed bands, really were enthusiasts.
Right.
And they weren't controlled too strictly from upstairs, from the accounts department. Whereas I think nowadays the accounts department has a much stronger say in what goes on, you know. Yeah. But we signed with Bebop, and they said, okay, we're not looking for huge returns at this stage. Let's see what happens around the third album. So they'd allow you to build up for maybe 3 albums, you know, before they'd see whether it was worthwhile going on. Oh no, it's got to be, let's have a hit straight away, you know. And of course the internet has helped liberate people from that, you know. But then the internet is so, it's just chock-a-block with kids in bands, you know. Yeah. And how do you sort through all that? How do you find the good stuff? Obviously word of mouth, as happens with people like myself, people spread the word, but it's not easy. It's not an ideal solution, I don't think.
No. Well, most of the young bands these days are finding that they can use the internet to get the word out and essentially give away the music and then make the money touring around selling the show instead of the music.
Yeah.
And
but
that seems the way it's going these days. But
yeah.
I don't know that there's still a cost of going out there and...
Well, that's it. The cost of...
This is all leading up to my, when is he going to come to Canada and the United States part?
It's the cost of doing it. I mean, I was very fortunate a couple of 3 years back, 2004, to have some sponsorship from Sound on Sound magazine to put a band together, and I had a 7-piece band, and we went out and we did a very successful tour. We had great audience turnout, but it was something that I wouldn't have been able to afford otherwise.
Right.
You know, not just the musicians, but the crew and all the rest of it. It costs a lot of money. The bigger a band is, the more they can afford to do these things with the internet. You know, I mean, people talk about Radiohead giving away their new album,
right.
but it was downloaded to something like over 2 million people.
Yeah.
So even if, you know, it wasn't really giveaway, it was, you can have it for nothing, or you can give us whatever you feel it's worth. So some people paid £1, some people £2, some people more. Yeah. But on 2 million downloads, they're laughing, you know.
Yeah.
And it's because they've already got a huge profile that's been built up by the record industry beforehand.
Right.
So whilst people say, oh, this is really kicking against the record industry, without the record industry there to get them in that position to start with, it wouldn't happen.
And they're charging, you know, $80, $90 or 40, 50 quid to go see them at a show, and
Yeah.
they're getting 10,000 people out at a time. So that's where the cash comes in.
That's right.